okay, we are all back and relieved, and now we're gonna grind out the Ukraine portion of this. So your article starts focusing on this guy who's part of the Azov battalion, right?
Yeah.
Even though he's from Moldova, and his history to me sounds like, oh, this guy got busted and was given a task, and the task was to
Yeah.
go do this thing in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a like, on some level, it's like the stupidest, fishiest sounding story of like how he ended up as like the star student of their research project or whatever.
Yeah, totally.
But if you actually look at what is said, right, on some levels,
Yeah.
I think maybe actually it is a true story, but we understand about weapons and psychedelics and dancing, right? That there's a lot of other information fields to tap into. But like, take us a little bit through. You told us a little bit about this organization, UPRA. Tell us a little bit about this guy from the Azov battalion and what happened with him, and then sort of start branching it out into what you think the connection is between the Ukraine war and the movement to sort of privatize and publicize, like privatize financially, but get, lots of people into this activity.
Okay. Yeah. So I will begin, as you said, with the person who, in their own words, in the words of UPRA, the group we were talking about earlier, that's doing all the psychedelic advocacy in Ukraine right now. They said that one of their first, quote, success stories was an individual named Stanislav Hybadulin. And I'm going to refer to him by his nickname that he picked up while fighting in the Ukraine war, Hitman. So this guy, Hybadulin, who's known as Hitman, although that's actually a name he just picked up recently. So, like, to be fair, like, for all I know, they gave him that name just to sound cool in the press release, who knows? But as you said, you keenly noticed that he's not even from Ukraine. He's from Moldova. And a decade ago in Moldova, he established a extremist, like, white supremacist terrorist group in Moldova. And there's a huge wave of this. It's not even like this is an isolated event. There's a lot of like neo-Nazi and like white supremacist like reactionary groups in Europe, and as we know now, in the US. But he was like he was actively involved in all of that in Moldova, and he would do things like him and his friends would go around and like beat up gay people and drug users and Muslims and stuff. And they were literally just out to like wreak havoc and to restore the power of what they thought was the Aryan race, So he, at some point, so the group that he founded that did all this stuff was called Skutel, and I'm probably saying that wrong because it's presumably a Moldovan word. The group was called Skutel Social, and that's SCUTUL, and then like the word social. And I read that is translated as the social shield, as in like to protect your social group, the social shield, which, if you think, that's just super white supremacist, just ugh. Anyway, they got busted at some point. And then after they got busted, he moves to Ukraine, to Kyiv, and he joins the Azov regiment, also known as the Azov battalion. Like, depending on the translation, it's known as a bunch of big things. But if people want to look this up, it's AZOV. And they're basically like a paramilitary group in Ukraine that has been active for years now. And they are straight up like neo-Nazis. And they're known for that. I mean, they rock all the Nazi imagery on their uniforms and all that. They have the tattoos of the Aryan mythology and all this kind of stuff. And he joined the Azov regiment and fought with them in the war that is now going on in Ukraine that broke out. Well, I mean, there was already conflict going on in Ukraine for years earlier that we just weren't told about. And then now we're told, oh, yeah, by the way, there's a war going on in Ukraine. And um, even though it's art, I mean, they've been occupied by Russia since for years now. But anyway, um, he fought in this war with the Azov. And like needless to say, he got some really gnarly like damage and um understandably got PTSD from his experiences in the war. But I think it's interesting because it's like, okay, yeah, he got PTSD fighting in like a neo-Nazi paramilitary group. Okay. And he used to beat up like drug users and queer people and stuff. It's hard for me to really have like sympathy for the guy. I mean, but anyway, I think at one point actually he did rack up some really gnarly injuries though.
Then he lost a limb.
Yes, yes, which understandably that would be incredibly traumatic. So it's not that I'm trying to pick on the guy, but I mean, he was literally like a white supremacist terrorist. It's just like, it's hard for me to feel bad that this guy hurt himself, like trying to, anyway. So, but the point is, in the process of recuperating his mental health and his physical health from all of this, he was told about like mushroom therapy. I'm not sure if he used like raw mushrooms or some form of psilocybin, but he had an experience with a guide, and he says it really helped his PTSD. He says it was a miracle and that now he feels very well. And okay, cool. And then like they the press releases that Oprah has published about him, they kind of just leave it at that. Like, hey, this guy, and of course they don't call him a neo-Nazi in their posts, right? But they do say he was in the Azov regiment. So in that sense, it's like they are literally just putting this information out there. Anybody who's reading and knows the Azov regiment, it's like, whoa, why is this guy in their press release? But for people who don't, it's like, okay, whatever, some other group that I don't know about. Okay, cool. And then they read about, oh, he did shrooms. Cool. Ooh, this is cool. And but anyway, so he became a success story, and it's not entirely clear like how he met Oprah, like did he do this therapy like before he knew Oprah or after he met them? Like that's not entirely clear. They in the press release they try to make it sound like he just kind of did this all on his own and it helped, and they just found him out of the blue and picked him and now he's like their poster child. But they don't say anything about like as far as like is he still a neo-Nazi? Like does he still go around and beat up queer people? Like there's absolutely no concern or analysis at all for like what is this individual doing in the world? What is his impact on society? Okay, yes, he took these drugs. Okay, they made him feel better. That's cool. But like, he literally has spent the last 10 years of his life terrorizing people. Like, what is actually going on here? So this goes to your point about like, you asked like what do I actually think is happening? So there's a lot of ways to look at it, but to boil it down for the sake of simplicity, well, first, I'll just say at the tail end of the article, I explain the historic connection to the Nazis actually doing research with psychedelics in Ukraine during World War II, which again, for people who know a little bit about World War II or the Nazis or MK Ultra, they might plug that piece of information in and kind of be like, oh, okay. But in context, like with no context, it doesn't really mean anything. It's like, okay, so like these fascists were screwing around with drugs in Eastern Europe, like that wouldn't really matter unless we kind of plug it in with everything else that we know about what's going on right now. So that's just one thing as a condition to what I'm about to say, which is that the Nazis were already experimenting with these drugs like in Ukraine. And then like the reason that matters is because the American government learned about these drugs and this approach to using them when they discovered the documentation at the concentration camps that they liberated at the end of World War II, like Auschwitz and Dachau. So prior to World War II, there was some interest in psychedelics among the academic crowd, but it was just kind of like this niche thing. But when the military found these documents that the Nazis were using, like mescaline and stuff, in these experiments, all of a sudden the military was like, what were they doing? I wonder if we can do the same thing. And there started to be funding for it. And that's the beginning, really, of this whole, like, the modern research for psychedelics. And when the Luces got into it, and like Gordon Wasson and Tim Leary and stuff. But so all I just said all that to say that, like, there's a history here. Like, this isn't just like an isolated event that's happening for no reason in a vacuum. There has been psychedelic research that already happened in Ukraine in World War II. The US military has already known about the gist of it since then. And the same people that knew about that are the same people who are initiated the process that has led to the creation of, like, um maps and all these research groups now that, like, may anyway. So, like, to the point, what is happening here? Like, why are they using this neo-Nazi named Hitman and saying, yay, he had some psychedelic therapy? What is actually happening? Two or three things at least that we can keep it simple. One, which we already said, they said it, they're trying to make the war in Ukraine sexy. Like, the actual people involved in this effort, like, literally said that. So we can take that as like one of their goals. The other goal that another person said at the same meeting is that, well, maybe these drugs can become a source of revenue for Ukraine, because after the war, everything's going to be destroyed and we're going to need money. So maybe we can sell ayahuasca therapy. That's literally in the New Yorker article that I mentioned, but they make it sound all cute and innocent, like, oh, like, the war is so fucked up, we're going to need a source of money and we can use this. And it's like, okay, on the surface, I guess that's cool, but it's like, wait a minute, you're talking about, like, redeveloping the Ukrainian economy and hoping that these drugs and this therapy is going to, like, somehow be a significant contributor to that. And, like, you're over here. And anyway, now the other thing, so A, they're trying to make the war sexy. B, they're trying to make money. And then the other thing, which kind of goes back to Danny's question of the mind control, it's like, if, and this applies to all the research that's being done that is aligned with the military industrial complex with these drugs, which is arguably all of the MAPS research, because a huge, like, portion of MAPS' own research is tied to the DoD, not all of it, but a lot of it. And a lot of the new psychedelic drugs that are being made right now are being made at a DARPA lab at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
I know, right? I mean, there's another institution where, if you've never heard the name before, or even you've heard it 100 times but you don't know anything about it, it's like, okay, the UNC Chapel Hill, whatever. But if people actually go and read the research of what goes down at this school and what
Gain of
has been
function,
going down.
anybody? Gain of function?
Ooh.
Just saying,
I
right?
mean, that's, again, there's many different, so, and so, like, what am I saying here? There is a dimension in which, or a lens through which one could argue that the military and the private sector are hoping that these drugs, it's like, the making the war sexy is, like, on the surface, kind of like, what are they doing? But at the deeper level, it's like your point about, like, the pop songs about the atomic bomb and, um like pacifying the resistance. And it's like, so in a nutshell, it makes the war, like, not only sexy for the moment right now, but more palatable going forward. So it's like, I don't know if you know this, but, like, they're also trying to do the same thing in Israel and Palestine. Did you know that? Anyway, that's a whole other thing we can
Doesn't
get into
surprise me. Yeah.
a different conversation. But, like, they and the, every
Wait,
now
hold
and
up.
then.
When you say trying, is there some sort of pushback to it?
Well, there's people who are concerned about basic humanitarian issues who are like, what's going on with you giving drugs to it's I mean, I think there's a pushback if you just like your random head in the scene, if they find out that information. I don't know that's but that is being pursued by like Maps, for example. Like you can go read, Maps has all kinds of stuff where like they are out over in Israel trying to work toward a way where they can give MDMA and ayahuasca to Palestinians and Israelis to like help them like, and it just depends like, wait a minute, who's actually like what's going on? Because anyway, that's again,
It's
we
such
can.
a like Hegelian dialectic problem
Yes.
reaction solution. Like, let's stay in perpetual war to
Boom.
create
Boom.
perpetual PTSD to
Boom.
create perpetual
Boom.
profit through
Yeah.
psychedelics.
Yes. I'm glad you said the Hegelian dialectic because I didn't want to be, I wasn't sure if y'all were into that, but I've been wanting to say it this whole time. This whole conversation is Hegel and dialect because the dialectic of Hegel came from Socrates, who studied the mystery cults of Egypt. Like this whole shit is like not even anything new. So the dialectic process is the one. I mean, there's many different interpretations of dialectic reason, right? This idea that the government is specifically using the dialectic process as a way to maintain order is like one school of thought. What's really cool, I don't know if y'all know the French philosopher uh Jean-Paul Sartre.
Mhm.
So he actually wrote a really dope book about the Hegelian dialectic. But what he argues is that even if the power structures here, it's actually this right here. Oh man, people go read this book. Holy shit.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
Anyway, he is into the dialectic and stuff, but he rejects Hegel. So he keeps the understanding that the dialectic is the dynamic that our society moves in, but he rejects um, the Hegelian dialectic is an idealistic dialectic, which means Hegel believed that the dialectic process was some kind of abstract truth at the highest level that was true, that we could prove and understand with finality. And that was the idea of Hegel. So his dialectic was an idealistic one. Okay. Sartre is into the dialectic, but he rejects the idealism because he believes that to think that we could actually control reality is foolish. And yes, there are people who are doing this, but there is a larger dialectic outside of the one that the government is using that is just like the natural dialectic of history and nature and stuff like that. So he gets into that in this book. If people out there are into the dialectic and Hegel and stuff, I highly would recommend them reading the book that Sartre wrote. It's called The Critique of Dialectical Reason. And it's cool because he is like anti-authoritarian. He's not even into Hegel. He says like Hegel was kind of didn't know what he was talking about because anyway, that's a whole other thing we could talk about later. But yes, the whole thing is a dialectic, like whether it's Hegelian or not, just depend. I mean, on one level, it is Hegelian. And then what Sartre would argue is that there's an even larger dialectical process happening that is beyond the control of any given class. But anyway, that's some whole other thing that we can talk about later. But yeah, so we to wrap up on Ukraine, it is a dialectic. That would be like a really heady philosophical way to say what's happening. But for people who don't read Hegel and stuff, it's a way for the government to exercise control over what's happening in society. And I know that sounds very vague, and it is very vague, and that's why they can get away with just like saying this out loud in a cute article in the New Yorker, like, "Oh, hey, by the way, this artist that works with DARPA and a bunch of people from Ukraine are talking about using drugs to make money." Huh? That is the dialectic. Like the fact that the government has learned how to spin this as something that is cool and edgy. That's exactly what this whole process is about. So that might be a good kind of, I don't know, conclusion point. I mean, it's the privatization of Ukraine, like we saw with Elizabeth Ames. Like they, this war is totally decimating the infrastructure and the markets in Ukraine, and they're going to need pools of funding to rebuild it. And then those pools of funding are going to be interested in monetizing their investment in Ukraine. And what this all indicates is that among the parties that are interested in funding the privatization of the redevelopment of Ukraine, like whenever this war is done, is all the psychedelic pharmaceutical people. And what people don't know is the psychedelic people are the pharmaceutical people. Mm-hmm. Go read the resumes of their board members. This isn't a bunch of hippies who like have been locked up and like smoke weed like every 10 seconds. This is like people in suits who went to the Ivy League. A lot of them went to the Kennedy School, Stanford. Like this is a top-down thing. It's not a bottom-up thing. So I'll leave it at that. Again, I could go, there's a million different directions, but to give it some sense of finality or conclusion, I guess, it's a revenue. It makes war sexy. And then like the super heady way of looking at it would be like it's a dialectical process that is currently unfolding. And yeah, so I don't know if there's anything else that we wanted to touch on before we wrap it up, because I know we probably already went over time, which I appreciate y'all giving me the space to ramble about all this.
So quickly, and then I think that Danny and I will both have things to say sort of in response and to sort of add on to what you said. I just am looking at the very basic definition of dialectic, the art of investigating or discussing the truth of opinions. Yeah. The second definition is more intriguing to me in terms of our particular topic here, which is inquiry into metaphysical contradictions and their solutions.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think that this is, I don't think that people, this is at the heart of psychedelic use, psychedelic research, and actually what government is doing, and all of the propaganda and argument over who's right, who's wrong, blah, 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 sort of creates a false playing field for people to focus on, right? They keep people focusing on investigating the truth of opinions, while those in the know are inquiring into metaphysical contradictions and their solutions. Boom. Right? So like the definition has like this whole other reality sort of in it. And the true dialectic process is actually with yourself, right? Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because I started doing this on a more advanced level when I got really into dancing while on mushrooms at parties, warehouse parties, and techno music. And I would go for hours and hours and hours. And it was like I had been in some sort of debate with myself about sort of the meaning of everything. And it might start out with some basic things like the truth of opinions or whatnot, but it would get into these more serious metaphysical questions and contradictions. And that was when I really started to begin to look at things completely different and whatnot. So the dialectical reasoning around all of this is fascinating.
Yeah.
Danny, did you want to say something about this? And then I kind of want to respond to and give my thoughts on what may be happening here in Ukraine.
My thoughts about this, in my mind, are super obvious, and it's odd to me that the world hasn't picked up. But when we're looking at like the suppression and the censorship around Hunter Biden's laptop, and the clear connections made between the man sitting in the White House, his family, and Ukraine, the fact that we can't see this whole thing as a giant Hegelian dialectic is just very odd to me. It's so obvious. I don't see how we're not seeing it. And this feels just like another aspect, and a very interesting aspect of like the whole push for psychedelics and this whole like money grab. And then I also, again, we'll bookmark this for another conversation, but the usual players part of your Substack is something that I really want us to like in another show, slowly walk through to help people understand and start to recognize the markers of this op.
Yeah. Okay. Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Just real quick to note on the Hunter Biden's laptop. Do you know? Okay, so at the time that his laptop was discovered, and he still is, he's close friends with Keith Abloh, who
I don't know who that is.
We'll put a bookmark in that. I'll just say I wrote a piece called "Yes, Ketamine is Used to Facilitate Sexual Abuse," and it's about this doctor who lost his license in Boston named Keith Abloh, who would get his patients really high on ketamine and then abuse them. And he is literally like BFFs with Hunter Biden. And they were hanging out when Hunter Biden's laptop was discovered. And it's just a really weird link between like what's going on, like the ketamine, like what does that have to do with all this? It's weird that it's like the same players. It's like you said, it's like, anyway, so yeah, let's get into that in the next, well, I'm happy to come back and
that's so interesting given the push for ketamine and the way they're pushing it, as we mentioned at the beginning of this conversation. You alone in an office with a practitioner who's being put on a pedestal as like the setup is super creepy.
Yeah. I'm happy to talk about that another time. There's a lot to it. I've written about it on my Substack, which folks can go check out. I have a bunch of different versions of my Substack because I have like different books and stuff. The stuff about the ketamine is on the drugism Substack, and the stuff about like Ukraine and the Nazis is on the High and Mighty Substack. But if you find either one of them, there's links to get back and forth and stuff. So you can go to highandmighty.substack.com and then like navigate from there, or my name, Vincent Rado, .substack.com to find it. But yeah, let's talk about this in the future. There's a lot there, and there's a lot more dots to connect. I'm glad that you both are interested in this and willing to give space to it, because I know it's really thorny and it's awkward, and a lot of people just frankly don't want to talk about this stuff. So thank you. Yeah, and thanks for having me, and thanks to everyone who's listening along.
Oh, you don't get off that quick. You have to go down my rabbit hole before you go. Sorry.
Oh, for sure.
Emily's going to make it weirder. Buckle up.
I'm going to make it weirder. But I don't want to go into this, but I'm just going to say it. Like what you're talking about also feels like it has resonance of the whole like metabiota scandal with Hunter Biden and Ukraine, in addition to the Burisma scandal and biolabs the stuff. So for people who aren't familiar with that, go take a look at that. We're not going to get into that here. So first of all, like I love the idea of people being like, you know what? I am not going to go to the Amazon to do ayahuasca. I'm going to go to Ukraine.
Oh shit! Oh god!
Like, well, I mean, that's kind of hilarious on some.
That's going to be the thing. It's going to be this whole like spa vacation. Give money to Ukraine.
Well, that's already happening in Jamaica. So I don't know if you saw, but Anderson Cooper did a primetime segment like the other night about the mushroom therapy that's going on in Jamaica right now. And I don't know if a lot of people may not know that Anderson Cooper is actually from the Vanderbilt dynasty.
Of course,
and he interned for the CIA like during or like right out of college. And it's exactly what you mentioned, where like they are already trying to get people to go to Jamaica to do shrooms, because it's either decriminalized or legalized in Jamaica, both weed and mushrooms. So what a lot of people don't know is you can actually go to Jamaica and do these things, and on the surface level, it's like, right on, let's go to Jamaica and do shrooms. But then it's like, what's actually going on? Colonization, biopiracy, like, how do you think all the people, I mean, sure, it brings tourist money and revenue, but yeah, there's a lot there that we could get into. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I didn't mention that, but I think you're spot on that they're going to, like, after the war, they may very well pitch Ukraine as like a destination to go. And that, you really brought it back to what's actually going on right now, which is that the US is currently in the midst of assimilating the psychedelic drugs into the mainstream, like medical establishment. And what's happening in Jamaica, what's happening in Ukraine, it's actually also happening in Australia, which just legalized MDMA and psilocybin therapy a couple months ago. One way of looking at it is that they are basically like the testing grounds for the people who are paying for the whole thing, who are primarily based out of the US, some in Europe. But it's like you said, where like Ukraine will be like the cool new place to go test out this wild new drug. But then like 100 years from now, this is all going to look boring. Like it'll be like, oh my gosh, I have to listen to my granddad talk about that time he went to Jamaica and did shrooms again. It's like, I know, granddad, it was so cool. It's like, this isn't actually anything that's going to like change the system. This is just like a new way to have fun and blow off steam. So yes. Yeah. Anyway, we'll get back into all this,
Okay. So here's my thoughts on what's going on. Right. And I do see that this could be offered to the people of Ukraine as like well, all of this awful stuff happened, but now we're going to build this sort of paradise and everyone will have jobs and everyone will be high all the time and won't be grand and everybody will, I can see that for sure.
Yeah.
You've obviously listened to a couple of my shows or our shows and whatnot, and I'm very, like, I'm getting to the place where everything comes down to power and genetics, right? DNA and energy, and in this case, the energy that I'm mostly interested in is nuclear energy, which is largely misunderstood by most people based on the way it's been presented in the various levels and layers of media and alternative media.
Yeah.
And one of the things that seems to be some kind of connective tissue between those two things are mushrooms and other sort of underground or like networked type of drugs like ayahuasca, iboga, things like that. When I say networked, I mean they come from trees or roots or vines, or they have some sort of mycelial network to them.
Yeah.
Right. This seems to be, you can find lots of academic papers where, like, it seems weird that you would find conversations about particle accelerators, psychedelic mushrooms, DNA, nuclear power, thousands of scholarly papers about these things, right?
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
I think one of the things that happens, what makes these you had these plant-based drugs or whatever so interesting, is that they somehow, like, the history of what has gone on in our reality is stored in the elements that are in the ground and then uploaded into these plants. And these plants are really good at unlocking that code into, like, a series of visuals or thoughts or feelings or experiences that someone can understand, decoded through the lens of, like, their reality or their personal experience. Like, act like these sort of like transducers or sort of like, right? And like unzipping like a code from the ancient past or from some other space. And so there are natural nuclear reactors, right? And it so happens that one of the oldest ones is in Gabon, where they do iboga ceremonies. And then we obviously have nuclear reactors that weapons companies and governments and whatever sort of build, but they're playing with the same stuff. And you have a lot of drug use and psychedelic use go on in small towns where there isn't much, but the local power plant that might be a nuclear power plant, but you have all these people having weird experiences and then another set of people getting cancer or whatever. So I think that largely our understanding of reality comes from where our genetics and our access to power, whether it be our own or external power, come together. And this psychedelics or these kinds of drugs are at the crux or the heart of this, because everybody has a different response to them, right? Everybody gets a different file unzipped when they have a highly dynamic, energetic experience or a trip or whatnot. And there are some locations that seem to be really hot spots for this. So when you're in your article, you talked about the Nazis had been in Ukraine, right? Like there's a section where you talked about Dnipro, Ukraine. And I went and I looked and I was like, all right, I'm going to go see if there is a nuclear power plant there.
Ooh.
And of course there's a nuclear power plant there. Whoa. And this is also where the dam just broke.
Oh, yeah, I know it's hot right now because the war is actively going on in Dnipro right now.
Right. So this is where the whole attack, where it was like the waters broke in the Ukraine and whatever. It has been my opinion since early on in this conflict, because remember in the early days of this, we were hearing about that Chernobyl was being shelled and how crazy it was that they were shelling this place that still had all of this like radioactive material and whatever, right? But nothing much really came of it. And like, why is there so much, like, if we think about every conflict that's ever happened, it's been about genetics and power, right? One group of people, whether it be racial, ethnic, tribal, and someone with more or less power in this conflict over land. All of the land that they're always fighting over has some sort of natural or built phenomenon on it that creates generates, sort of stores a lot of energy. And in my personal opinion, lots of things can happen from this, but one of the things that really happens is that this distorts the spatial and temporal field. So we're talking time travel, we're talking dimensional travel, and all the people who are busy, busy inquiring into metaphysical contradictions in their solution, while the rest of us are practicing the art of investigating and discussing the truth of opinions. They know this. And so, like, these locations are basically access to hyperspace, right? They can map out, right? Which they never pick these names for their organizations by accident, but everybody has access to a different version of whatever it is based on what happens in their mind and their body when they hit these energy fields. And if you watched, I don't know if you ever watched the TV series The Man in the High Castle, that's based on Philip K. Dick's book.
K. Dick novel. Yeah.
Right. So they basically, like, they have this technology called, I always say it wrong, so everyone, I know Laura and my German listeners are going to correct me, but I'm going to say it wrong because that's how I say it, Die Nevenwelt, which means the next world or the new world. And this and there's some people who can do this naturally, but they're experimenting with this technology that is kind of like some sort of particle accelerator or something that moves people from one world to the next world. And they have discovered that there's an endless number of worlds and that the Nazis are going to conquer all of them, right? And some people seem to have access to them and others don't. And, you know, this gets into lots of weird stuff with Nazis and Jews and all kinds, and Ukrainians, because if you've looked at into Khazaria and all this kind of stuff, right? This is, whether it be the location or the people or what happens to the specific people at this location, right? This is some kind of ancient artifact technology that allows movement between realms. And it's interesting, like, everybody wants to fight over that. Like, why, you know, we hear this story about it's very important for Vladimir Putin to have access to the Black Sea and all that kind of stuff, right? Okay, that makes logical sense on one level, but every war we've ever been in, Iraq, Afghanistan, all this kind of stuff, they're looking for ancient artifacts and ancient locations where there have been ongoing natural nuclear reactions for billions of years, like this place in Gabon and all this kind of stuff. It's like Raiders of the Lost Ark shit, right? It's like that kind of stuff. Totally. And so now I'm thinking, okay, like, we know this place does this thing, but there's no room in the mansion that we don't want to have access to. And the only way to access all these rooms is to get a lot of people to come here. So if you're going to offer psychedelic assisted therapy in Ukraine.
Wait, hold on. Why does that translate to accessing? Can you, like, slow it down? Why does getting a lot of people to come there? Is it because of their perception?
When you go there, the dimensional field that opens up for you is going to be, like, different than so I've explained this before in different ways, but, like, let's pretend that reality, the whole reality, not just a little slice that we're stuck in, is like an enormous hotel, and each room within it is like a different dimension or a different timeline, right? But you can only go into the one that you have keys for. And the key is your genetics, right? Yep. But what activates, just like when you go to the hotel, they give you your card key, but it's not activated until they do that. The energy field of the said location interacts with your genetics in a way that opens up the room of the hotel that you're allowed to be in. Now, when I go to a hotel, I'm perfectly content in my room and I don't care what's going on in all the other rooms. But peeping Toms and surveillance and all this other stuff has been around
NSA.
since the time. Correct. They don't want there to be a room they can't get into or anything going on in a room that they can't know about, right? So if you come for psychedelic therapy, and then let's say that they put one of these clinics like proximate to where there's one of these locations, and then people are taking their shit and doing their thing and reporting, they're confessing, they're having their moment of confession, right? Exactly. And, like, they may say something that just feels to them like it's meaningful to them because it's like, oh, they had a concurrent or a past life where some distant relative gave them some thing that belongs to their grandma or whatever. But like the fuckers at the fucktard agency are like, oh, that shit's the fucking Ark of the Covenant or the Holy Grail or whatever the fuck it is, right? Like this is the kind of stuff that's happening. And I live in Austin here, where lots of people are microdosed all the time, and where there's no doubt that like augmented reality and extended reality already exists in public spaces here. When Ukraine is decimated and they start to rebuild, it's probably going to be a pretty smart place.
Oh yeah.
Be smart. And when people are microdosed,
yes,
like, it's harder to tell if you're in an augmented reality or if you're in nature or whatever, right? It's like a mixed media kind of reality type of thing, right?
Yes.
So there's two things that are going to happen. It's going to provide a place that's leveled and that people will be happy to have built up and be nice and new and whatever. And all that shit's going to be smart. And it's, it's going to interact with people in a different way, but it allows having people microdosed, like they're going to be sensitive to things they wouldn't otherwise be sensitive to. But if they see bright colors flashing or something going on, they're going to assume it's because they're microdosed and not because there's like some weird sensor in the atmosphere, or that they're actually seeing something from like the dimensions that are sort of overlapped here because they're near whatever is really there in Dnipro or near Chernobyl or whatever. All of these.
Well, and I also think that the microdoses are going to be engineered to be frequency
100%.
complementary with the smart
100%.
Khazaria.
100%. Also, I think that you can do designer mushrooms. You can do all kinds of stuff. I think there's going to be ways of creating shared mind experiences. There's going to be ways of like using, I mean, I get into some fucking weird shit, but I'm like, I told my friend Christopher Gardner, or I said it at a conspiracy cocktail, like, what if they're like, when I go to parties, warehouse parties, like techno and house parties, they always have it like Andy Gumps. Like, what if someone is collecting all the shit of the people that goes to parties and growing the mushrooms in there, and then people are taking those mushrooms and it's creating like a feedback loop of like hive mind shared experience. You can do this with people who are highly intelligent and in the tech industry that kind of share like a hive mind and be able to build on ideas. Like, I'm not saying it because but I think there's all of these kinds of things are possible when you're dealing with these types of plants that do a really good job at decoding information that's sort of packed into something, right? And sort of opening it up, letting everybody see the file, digesting it in their own way, and then building on whatever that is, right? And if you really look into all the things that have gone on in Ukraine, trafficking of every sort, organ, child, drugs, sex, all of this kind of stuff, all of that stuff to me is really about moving energetic fields and the things that allow them to open up from place to place. It's like tossing the nuclear football around the world. So you're moving, I think, lots of human trafficking is like, oh, we figured out this chick has access to the room we really want to get to. So we're going to move her over to this location. And like, yeah, it sucks that we're going to have to use her for this dehumanizing thing. But like, while she's in this room having that experience that's degrading to her, her energy field is like opening up a new dimension to us in the room that we're hiding in next door, where we're also surveilling her from. Right. Like all this crazy kind of shit. So to me, that this is that when either they've always known this, but they haven't figured out, like, I don't think they like the idea that everyday people have ideas, intelligence, or access to information fields that they don't. And so, like, they would have preferred to keep this private. But I think they have figured out that there's all kinds of interesting bits of data hiding within individuals spread out all over the place. And what's a way that we can get people who might not otherwise start unlocking their potential? And this is a way. And especially look that they're going in, you just said they're in Australia. Like, this is kind of like a sorry, not sorry about what we did to you during COVID here. Now you can trip balls, right? And just enjoy yourself. And it's going to be the same people administering you your MDMA that like tied you down and forced the shot on you, right? Like,
well, did you know that one of the main dudes who was involved in the development of this is just really heavy. I mean, I don't want to say the wrong brand. It was either the Moderna or the Johnson and Johnson vaccine. Like one of the dudes who was highly involved in the development of that is currently on the board at MAPS. So
Shocker.
yeah, yeah. Anyway, I mean, it's not even like, so I guess I just mentioned that to say that that connection is not even like hypothetical. That's like literally on the record. They got the same people like working for him and stuff. But
I
yeah.
think it's also even possible, this is the last thing I'll say and then we'll wrap up, is that whatever is going on in Ukraine, because my friend Les Luthor went there like week 1 of the conflict, and what he said he saw was basically like something between like a stage set that was being controlled and what the United States looked like week 1 of the lockdown, but there was nothing that resembled anything that they were saying was going on.
Yeah.
I think it's possible that like overlapping of realities and dimensionality are happening there already, right? Just by the nature of that space and whatever time we are at in the cycle. And that if when Les goes there, he's like, nothing much is happening. And someone else goes there and they're like, this is a fucking bloody war zone, right? Yeah. Like, just like, you know, when someone's like, I see another family living in my living room, right? And no one else sees them. It's like everybody kind of sees into the iteration of reality that their mind and their genetics allows for, right? Yeah. And I think Ukraine might be this kind of like kaleidoscopic sort of generator of versions of reality.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think there's a lot to that. I mean, yeah, there's I mean I would be happy to honestly have a whole other conversation about that. There's a lot to say there, but I don't know if we're trying to basically like cut it or how much, you know, there's stuff we could say about like Ukraine and what Hitler was doing over there. Which I guess we can just put a note on for later, which is the Nazis actually believed that certain of the Jewish populations in Ukraine were actually like different from the other ethnic populations of Jewish people who the Nazis wanted to get rid of. And part of the reason they were in Ukraine is because they were trying to find the Jewish people who they believed belonged to the ethnic group that actually was not really Jewish, and therefore the Nazis were cool with them.
Meaning so that the Rothschilds?
I don't know if they were involved in this particular process, but I mean, that's again a whole other, you know, dimension to all of this. Yeah.
This is like, allegedly they were a Khazarian tribe, like the Satanists.
Oh, I could see that. Yeah. I know some about the Rothschilds. I'm not like an expert on them, but I think I've read some stuff about that. I could totally, yeah.
I think what he's talking about, because I don't think the Khazarians were those people. I think the Khazarians were doing all sorts of nefarious stuff. I think this is the same group of people that, for whatever, I think the story we're told is wrong, but some of the ideas are right, that Mengele was looking for women and children with a particular type of eyes because these people were different. And so they were separating the people from the others to either keep them alive and study them, or even if they killed them, to study them. And the way that they were identifying who they were was by looking at their eyes.
Okay.
Very interesting.
And they were with the condition called central heterochromia. And right. So a
condition like that, was there an anomaly that they were expressing?
So in my narrative, these are the people with the capacity for natural temporal dimensional travel.
Okay.
They can go into the most rooms in the hotel even if they don't have the key.
Yeah.
Okay, so I got another chill when you said that. And was that like kind of an earlier analog version of the mass testing that we saw them pushing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. At this point, like, you know, the longer we go forward in history, the more people are going to mix cultures, races, right? And certain characteristics are going to be made like less and less obvious, but the information packet is still inside. And so you used to be able to look at somebody's bone structure or eye color and determine. Now you got to stick something up their nose, and you got to do it regularly, because some of these people even have the ability to shapeshift in the genetic sense, right? So, and that might be a quality as well. Like that could be really fascinating or frustrating to someone who's trying to control the world. We keep targeting something at them, but it's like we just can't catch them, right?
Yep.
Because something keeps shifting. They're able to transmute, transduce whatever we throw at them, right? So
I just want to say, Emily, I feel like you read my mind because when we were talking about making Ukraine this like destination psychedelic spot, and Vince, you referenced, I think it was you referencing what's going on in Jamaica. In my mind, I was thinking like, why do you need to travel anywhere to have a psychedelic experience, which is so internal? So then your theory, Emily, makes total sense because when we're on psychedelics, it's like exponential doors open and information comes in. And when you're combining that with these hot spots of energy, power, whatnot, like, thank you for answering the psychic question that I silently held in my brain.
Yeah, I mean, there's always some consistencies between like for each person, they have certain things that they recognize in most or all of their psychedelic experiences, but there'll be a different sort of flavor or tone or texture or colors or pattern to it based on who you're with, where you are, what else you did that day, your state of mind. And location is super, super important to this. Like I've had a few like very interesting things happen when I've been in Joshua Tree that don't happen when I trip anywhere else.
Right.
Right. And that has to be because of the nature of the place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot to that. I mean, just to drop another book real quick, if y'all haven't already read this, it's a good one to check out. Hitler's Monsters, and it's available on the Internet Archive for free, actually. But it's a really great book that examines the Nazis' interest in the occult. And Emily, I feel like it just really like it fits in with a lot of that. The Nazis were really into a school of thought known as anthroposophy, which was by,
Blavatsky.
like Rudolf Steiner. Yeah, they were tied to Blavatsky and the theosophists and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, and I mean, I think that Robert Forte also knows a lot about this, but there's some fascinating connections between the emergence of the Nazi Party and the occultist milieu that was kind of operating in Europe at the time. And then to tie it to the psychedelics, I mean, already we know that the Nazis were experimenting with mescaline in Dachau and in Dnipro and Auschwitz. Additionally, okay, so this is the Nazis at one point, they basically banned all occult groups in Germany except for a couple that they handpicked as like, all right, you guys will let you slide because we like you. And one of the occult groups that they permitted to keep practicing was the anthroposophists with Steiner. And then what's interesting is in the same time period, three different people who knew Albert Hoffman have all said that he belonged to an anthroposophist group in the 30s and that they had been working on developing LSD and psilocybin much earlier than is on the public record.
Does not surprise me one bit.
Yeah. I've written about that on my Substack, and we can talk about that in a different conversation, but I just wanted to point that out because like the Nazis are into like the occult, and to connect what you're talking about, Emily, to my own research, like I would recognize that as from a historical perspective, it's what the historians refer to as the mysteries.
Yep.
Like the Osiris mysteries, the Eleusinian mysteries. That is the occult wisdom and practices that the upper class uses to maintain like order. And like Hitler, I don't know if people know this, but there's a quote from Hitler where he said a new age of magic interpretation of the world is coming. Of course, it was in German, but it was like the German version of a new age, like he was literally writing about in his notebook, and as if that was something that he wanted to help bring about. So this connects really to just tie it all up in like a bow, because you had mentioned to me that you wanted to discuss the connection between fascism and the psychedelic drugs. That actually there's a term called acid fascism that was coined in 1972 by this dude named David Felton, who wrote a book called Mind Fuckers. And what Mind Fuckers is about is Charles Manson and a bunch of other cults in the 60s that used drugs to influence their members to commit like heinous acts and all types of weird spiritual stuff. And
I grew up just very, very close to the Manson Tunnel in Chatsworth, which I think is a cross-dimensional pathway. So you're reading my mind on this. I hadn't heard of that book. I mean, maybe I've heard of I don't know if I have.
It's very rare. I learned about it from a writer named Jules Evans, who does a lot of excellent work that I think you two would actually really appreciate, because he really looks at what's happening with psychedelics like right now, but he has a critical, like, he exercises his critical thinking, and his writing is awesome. So he actually is the one who he wrote a piece on either his Medium or on a Substack. He has a newsletter called Ecstatic Integration that y'all would probably dig. But he wrote about this Mindfuckers book, so I didn't even know about it until like a few months ago.
I just remember that my friend Jeremy is writing like a script, and he was looking at this for that. So he had mentioned it to me. I'm going to have to take a look at it. What you said about Steiner's group, or about the anthroposophists, researching and developing and studying LSD and psilocybin much earlier than thought. My guess would be that they had figured out that you could do the thing I talked about, whereas you could extract like the perfectly stored information on the history of this reality through the elements that are in the ground where energetic things had taken place. So they knew that the uploading, like they want, you know how they talk about, okay, they can store the entire Alexandria library on 1 gram of DNA, right? So like, we don't know that we're not just walking around in meat suits that are just full of like little hard drives of information waiting to be passed on to the next thing, right? So these plants are really good to upload that information into, and then it's kind of like unzipping the file. So when I send you the shows, it comes in the zip file. You know, if I send you too big of one, it'll come in a zip file, and then you unload it, and then the shows are inside. These mushrooms carry, or the ergot or whatever that they were working with, has those compressed files that then they can work with the unzipped files of. And they had figured that out, that was the most accurate way to figure out the historical past, because people's minds and memories can be fallible. People have their own personal interests in telling the story a certain way, because he who controls the past controls the future. So the only accurate way to get information is literally from the earth itself, and to upload it into something that will serve as the transducer of that information into a different form of energy.
Which completely offers such a completely different perspective on these wars over specific regions and land. It's like such a different conversation from this lens of perception.
Right. We all think it's about like gas and oil and, little shit to make our phones work. But these fools, and think about it, like, people go sick or get sick or go crazy if they try and take, rhodium or rubidium or ruthenium or any of these things. But if you can get the mushroom to take it for you and filter out all the parts that you can't deal with, and then you take the mushroom and you get the good shit, right? That's what it is.
Unless we're dealing with monatomic, because apparently monatomic rhodium is the shit for longevity.
Well, that's interesting, because rhodium is the thing that's in all of the catalytic converters that are being stolen from hybrid cars. Remember when that happened? And it's been my theory since then is that there's a black market for it, either because it's a drug or because it can be used to create free energy, which is connected to time and dimensional travel.
Well, and that's all the lore. I'm sorry, Vince, but that's all the lore around gold, and why gold is really valuable, and why China's really buying up all our gold, because monatomic gold, is why we have the pyramids and is, cross-dimensional and all those things.
Yeah. All right, let's wrap it here because I don't think I can sit still on this wooden chair for for 1 second longer. Vince, thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell people where they can buy your books, where they can find your work, all that jazz?
Yes. So to buy my books, go to it. Wait, let me take a deep breath here. Hold on. I'm so wound up on what you were talking about. Whew, yes. Okay. So my books can be purchased on illicit.news, and that's the word illicit, ILLICIT.news. I have my books and I have links to my Substack on that website. The Substacks all have different like URLs, but if you go to highandmighty.substack.com, you'll see the articles that we've been talking about today and a bunch of other research, and then that will link you to my other Substacks. The book I'm currently working on is my fourth, but I have a lot of my old writing up on Substack and a lot of new stuff every week. Again, that's illicit.news for the books, and then that'll also have links to the Substacks. Yeah, and I really appreciate your time and your support. It means a lot to me. And yeah, there's a lot more I could say, but we'll save it for a million more conversations.
Don't worry, we'll say it all at some point.
It was so fun having you on, Vince. I could talk to you forever. I'm really looking forward to doing a bunch more shows with you. And thank you for all your incredible work. Everyone definitely subscribe to his Substacks, buy his books, all the things.
All right.
Thank you
Thank you,
so
everybody.
much.
We will see you next time.